Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabaz. As ever, I am the IT Geek. Welcome to the start of Module 2. So we've covered a fair bit already. Nine different episodes in Module 1 where we covered a lot of the sort of beginner level stuff, you know, the introduction to Azure AD, a lot of multi-factor authentication. So we've covered a lot already. And now we are getting ready to do Module 2 now. So before I get started, say hello to my co-host, my co-partner for this series, Dwayne. Good afternoon, Dwayne. How are you?
I'm good, Shabaz. How you doing? How you doing, everybody?
I'm very good, thank you, and I hope everybody watching is very good. We've also had, this is week 2 now of the series. We've had some great feedback in week 1. We've had a lot of positive from the community, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for your support. So I will get cracking with the episode. Okay, so as I said, I think I said it towards the back end of Module 1, I will do a recap of who I am and who Dwayne is. So, my name is Shabaz, as I mentioned. I'm the IT Geek. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Enterprise Mobility. Been in IT for 15 plus years. I'd say cloud for just roughly 10 years or so, give or take a few years. I work for a net company as a master. And I do all sorts of content, including YouTube. I'm also an MCT and a published author. So now let me introduce. Dwayne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Dwayne Natwick, also known as Captain Hyperscaler. I am also a Microsoft MVP, and I am the principal cloud security tech lead for Atos, a global systems integrator.
And also, what Dwayne fails to mention is
and an author.
Yes, which is really is one of the most important facts of all, because Dwayne authored the SC300 book, which came out earlier this year. So, and I was a technical reviewer.
You can see them behind me here.
Yeah, you can see them all behind you. So this has come very much full circle for myself and Dwayne, where we've worked together on the book, and now we're working together on a YouTube series. So it's a nice little story. So, new picture. I promised a new picture because I bet everyone's getting sick of the first one. We are on Module 2.
Don't be scared of that cloud there, Shabaz. You look terrified.
He's a little bit scared, a little bit unsure
cloud.
So this module is implementing authentication and access management solutions. Okay. So let me just do I'm going to do a quick breakdown of what you can expect in this module. First of all. So just to let you know, again, this slide is slightly wrong. I do apologise. I think it's now actually 20-25% because a lot of things changed only a couple of weeks ago, actually. So first episode, which is today, we're going to do plan, implement Azure multi-factor authentication. Originally, this was a 1-part episode, but since has changed to a 2-part. We have 2 episodes on this topic. Again, a lot of things changed a couple of weeks ago with the syllabus, so we've tried to incorporate that in our content. We've then got, I believe, 3 episodes on Manage User Authentication, okay, where we're going to cover various topics around authentication. Then I believe we have a few episodes on administering conditional access policy. I think this might actually be quite a bit of a bigger one, so it's going to be a 3-parter. And then finally we have, I believe it's 2 episodes on Azure AD identity protection. One of my favourite topics in this syllabus, I've got to admit. So let's get started with this episode. So what we're going to cover in this episode. So this is, as I said, planning and implementing and managing Azure MFA and self-service password reset. So this is the first video in this. We'll talk about planning Azure MFA deployment. Then we're going to cover implement and managing Azure MFA settings. And we're going to talk a little bit about managing MFA settings for users. And then I'll hand over to Dwayne to look at configuring MFA via conditional access policy. We've got another little demo, we're just going to go through some of the settings around MFA and how you can implement and manage those, okay? So let's talk a bit about when you're planning for MFA, because this is quite an important topic. You know, before you go head first into deploying MFA, a few things you really need to be aware of and make sure you have in place. So again, this is from personal experience as well. Roll out in smaller groups. Don't do like a massive, if you have like thousands and thousands of users, don't deploy to them all at once. The more you deploy, the more risk you are inviting into your rollout. So try and do smaller groups. So again, if you're talking thousands of users, maybe try and do a few hundred a day. Something that's manageable. Obviously, this depends on the size of your team as well. If you've got more people within your team who can manage any issues that might occur, because let's face it, with users there's always going to be issues. We've all been there where we've created documentation and we've covered every base, but still a user finds a way to break it. So try and roll out into smaller groups if you can. And this is just as general. I suppose this is general in every sort of deployment. Communication's key, and that's in life, I suppose, as well. But a detailed communication plan will mitigate a lot of risk. So letting users know of the changes, when they're going to occur, what they can expect, and just keeping that channel of communication open between your departments, your department heads, your sort of key stakeholders as well. You need to design the MFA policy as well. Don't just dive headfirst into it and be clicking around. Try and make sure you've got that design in writing. You've got a design on paper, and make sure that's been approved by the business to make sure they've bought into it. Again, you'll do it before you do a design. You'll do that whole sort of information gathering. How should my policy look? What do I need to put in my policy? Obviously, Dwayne's going to show us a bit of the MFA policy and some of the options later on. So, and finally, from a planning perspective, there's multiple authentication methods as we're going to talk about. So, decide on which one best suits your needs. If you're a business that where users don't have smartphones, I know we're in 2022, almost at the end. We're 3/4 of the 2022. People should have some. You'd think people have smartphones, but I've seen it where people don't have smartphones. Then the Microsoft Authenticator app, authentication mechanism isn't going to work for them. So make sure you decide on a supported authentication method depending on your business and organizational needs. Let's move on to looking at some of those authentication methods that we've just mentioned. So first of all, let's talk about Windows Hello for Business. Okay, we do have a section later on with a bit more detail about Windows Hello for Business, but just want to touch on it now. So in Windows 10, Windows Hello for Business replaces passwords with strong two-factor authentication on your Windows 10 devices. So this authentication, it consists of well, it's not new anymore, but it was when it was launched, a new type of user credential that is tied to a device, and it can be a biometric or a PIN. So a biometric is obviously your face or your finger, and a PIN, it can be alphanumeric or just digits. So it replaces that password. Okay. So the next is the FIDO security key. So FIDO2 security keys are unphishable standard-based passwordless authentication method that can come in any form factor. Okay, it's normally a physical sort of device. So FIDO, which stands for Fast Identity Online, is an open standard for passwordless authentication. Okay, it allows users and organizations to leverage the standard to sign into their resources without using a password. Okay, it uses that external sort of key, physical key. So let's move next on to Microsoft Authenticator app. This is probably the most, in my experience, I know it's probably the most commonly used one. So this Microsoft Authenticator app, it provides an additional level of security to Azure AD, and essentially you can use it on a Microsoft account, and it's available on different devices, so mobile devices like Android or iOS, or if you believe in a tablet. With this Authenticator app, users can authenticate in a passwordless way during sign-in, and again, I think we're going to be talking about this later on in this series. Or you can use it as an identification option during your self-service password reset sort of process. And again, it's used for multi-factor authentication as well. Finally, let's touch on this OAuth hardware tokens. So OAuth hardware tokens typically come with a secret key or seed, and it's a pre-programmed token. Okay, that you order that through the Azure portal. So these keys must be input into Azure AD as described. I'm going to go through the steps now. So secret keys are limited to 128 characters, which may not be compatible with all tokens. And the secret key can only contain characters from lowercase a to z or uppercase a to z, or the digits 2 to 7. So you notice it's missing out like 1 and 0. It must be encoded in base 32 as well. So I'm sure Dwayne will touch on those steps in the demo. Just give you a high level overview of that. Just let's carry on with these authentication methods quickly. So we saw the OAuth hardware tokens. There's also OAuth software tokens. And these are typically applications such as the Authenticator app, or other. I think Google has an Authenticator app as well. So Azure AD generates a secret key or a seed again that's input into the app and used to generate one-time passwords or OTPs. Okay. Now we're going to talk a bit about some of the older authentication mechanisms. So SMS, text messaging. So this type of authentication lets users sign in without providing or even knowing their username or password. So after an account is created by the administrator on Azure AD, they can enter their phone number at the sign-in prompt. They receive an authentication code via text message, and this authentication method simplifies access to the applications and services. So that code they get, they input into the Azure portal to log in. Now, sounds quite simple, and you'd think it sounds like quite secure, but it's actually it's one of the less secure authentication methods. Text messages in recent history have been known to be high risk and can be hacked quite easily. So it's not really recommended to use SMS, but it's still there because, again, there is a use case for it out there. One of the older sort of mechanisms is voice. So users can also verify themselves using a mobile phone or office phone as a secondary form of authentication. So it's used during that MFA piece. So when you put in your password, you're asked to authenticate, and you essentially get a phone call, and it'll be an automated system, and you just have to verify by pressing a button on your phone that it's you. Again, this is quite deemed like an unsecure authentication method, but it's still there because there's a necessity for it. Finally, good old-fashioned passwords. This is the original authentication method, and again, the reason why we have all these different more secure authentication methods is because passwords were a problem. People forgetting them, people too complicated, passwords being hacked. So again, even though it's still there, it's not recommended to use. There's other authentication methods that are recommended ahead of this.
Something, Shabaz, I always like to point out as to why we're saying SMS and voice are not secure is if you think about when a phone call comes through on your smartphone or an SMS text, generally in the lock screen, you can still answer that call. You can still see the text of the information that's in that text. Now, some of the providers, like I know my iPhone, it doesn't show the full information of the text until I look at it. So somebody that doesn't have my facial recognition is not going to do that. But still, smartphones, even when they're locked, you can answer a phone call. So if you're using voice as a second form of authentication, and you leave your phone sitting at your desk, and somebody's trying to unlock your laptop that's sitting on your desk, they can easily be you because all you gotta do is answer the phone and push a button on the keypad. So that's really something to kind of understand around. Yeah, they're valid forms of multi-factor authentication, but why they are seen as insecure.
Spot on. No, really good example, Dwayne. Just moving on now, let's talk about implementing and managing those Azure MFA settings. Okay, so just want to do a bit of an overview of the certain settings that are there. Again, I'm sure this is something Dwayne will touch on in the demo, just to give you an overview. First one is account lockout. So you can temporarily lock accounts in the multi-factor authentication service if there are too many denied authentication attempts in a row. So again, you can put a limit on this. So this feature now applies to users who enter a PIN to authenticate as well. So before it was just MFA, but if you're using a PIN now, this option is available. So next is blocked users. So a blocked user will not receive MFA requests. Authentication attempts for that user will be automatically denied, and a user will remain blocked for 90 days from the time they are blocked. You can manually unblock the user. There's an option again, I'm sure Dwayne will also show you. It just says unblock, and you can just click on that. fraud alert. This is some I do like this one actually. So this allows users to report fraud if they receive a two-step verification request and they didn't initiate it. So just imagine you sat on holiday, sunny somewhere, sunny Spain, those Europeans, and all of a sudden you see that your MFA app is just asking you to authenticate. And you're like, I'm on holiday, I've not done that. Through your, I think through the app, you can actually report fraud. So it's quite nifty how you can do that. I do like that feature. So there's an OAuth tokens section, and this is where you can configure those tokens that we mentioned. And again, sure Dwayne will just give us a bit of an overview when we look at the MFA settings of that and the options you have around there. So there's also a section for phone call settings, and this is where you can customize the verification options you receive for the phone call. So it's again, I suppose it gives you a bit more customization, but as Dwayne mentioned, it's still not as heavily used. It's because it's not secure. So now I just want to quickly move on to managing MFA settings for users. So we have two sets of different sort of areas. There's two tabs within this section. Again, keep on putting Dwayne in the spotlight and giving him more and more things to show, but I'm sure I'll do a quick overview of this. So the first is user settings. Okay, now here we can enable and disable or enforce MFA for a user. And then we have service settings. Now this is where, rather than the users, you're actually doing it more around the MFA service. Okay, so here we can enable app passwords, so allow users to create app passwords to sign into non-browser apps. Okay. We can add trusted IP, so this is I've used this quite a bit. So especially if you have, a lot of companies, organisations tend to do where they not block, but within their network, within their on-premises network, they will have it so you don't need to do MFA, because technically you're in a secure network, you're within their grounds. A lot of companies have passes to scan into rooms, etc. So they've got that additional security. So if you are within that network, you're not deemed a security threat. So a lot of people add their IPs of their on-premises networks, or so if any requests are coming from the IP address, you don't have to authenticate with MFA. So select verification options. So this is, again, we just talked about a lot of the authentication methods here. You can define which ones you want to enable. So if you do want to use just the Microsoft Authenticator app, you make sure you just tick that one and you don't tick anything else, and that'll be the only option that's available to your users. Finally, just want to touch on, there's an option to remember MFA on a trusted device. So this is, again, what companies tend to do is, again, this is probably to help users and give them a bit of a better experience. Make it so maybe every couple of days, rather than having to authenticate every time you go onto an app or log into the portal or go onto SharePoint or something. Do it so maybe once a day or once a week, or whatever the security policies of that business. You can define it here. So remember the MFA on a trusted device for a certain amount of days, and you can set that within the portal. So yeah, Dwayne, I know I've put you in the spotlight quite a bit already, and I've asked you to do a lot, but I'm going to hand over to you, my friend, to do the demo.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's talk about some of these areas here. So we are in the portal, and we have Azure Active Directory here. We have user settings within the portal here regarding the registrations and everything. But if we go into our users, and let me go in and select one of my users here, and we go to authentication methods here, you can see the different authentication methods, and it's changing to our access panel. They are doing some changes within this area. Here we'll do switch back to the old experience. They are integrating Azure AD and self-service password reset as well, from the from the traditional two separate areas. So we've got those. We've got these different areas in here within the authentication methods. Okay. They love when they change the portal around and you can't get to things where you want. So
they really are trying to set us up in this series, aren't they?
Yeah,
First they changed the exam syllabus, and now they're changing the portal.
Yeah. If you go to authentication methods, this will get us there a little bit easier. And we have our policies here. And here's where we have different things in terms of like FIDO security keys. I do have 2 users set up with Microsoft Authenticator. We got text messaging, temporary access passes. We've got the user registration details in here for what you have available in terms of self-service password reset, whether we're using passwordless, and whether you're using multi-factor authentication, and seeing who's capable and who's not capable of those capabilities. Registration campaign here, we can set up and set up prompts for setting up authentication methods. Typical thing, that when you create a user, if you have multi-factor authentication enabled through a policy or through a conditional access, it's going to give the user and it's going to prompt the user. And this is also part of security defaults, which we talked about in domain 1. Is if you have security defaults enabled, it's going to enforce that and make everybody put in some form of secondary verification, like and verify that, which is generally an email and a phone number to start before we start using multi-factor authentication. If I go here to like multi-factor authentication, you can see we can enable it. We can enable it for all users here, and this is going to set up that multi-factor authentication across everybody. So right now I've just got select users, and I just have it on my 2 users, because really my two names, both my Captain Hyperscaler domain as well as my personal email address, I utilize to get into this tenant. Anybody else is just really demo users or external users, so I don't worry about enforcing that because they're not using this tenant, they're not getting into this tenant. So those are things that we can do in terms of the authentication methods. Again, if we want to do a security key, we can enable that and configure that as well. If I go back to my Azure Active Directory and go to my users, we'll look here at the MFA settings here before we get into how to enforce it through conditional access. And here you can see, I can select here and manage those user settings that Shabaz was talking about. Require the users to provide contact information again. We can delete the existing users and app functions. We can restore multi-factor on all remembered devices. So we can do that in the user settings. If we go up to the service settings, this is where we have that flexibility here. If we have any non-browser based applications that we need to have specific app passwords, so this goes along with that legacy authentication techniques, we can allow that in here, or we can block that if we don't want to use that and we simply want to use modern authentication. We can do that as well. Here we can put trusted IP, so if we don't want multi-factor authentication when somebody's in a corporate network, we can do that as well. Not really recommended. Here we have the methods available to users. So we still have text message in here. I don't use it. I use the app. I prefer the app myself. And we can use a push notification, or we can use a verification code. And then here's that remembered MFA, and we can set this to set this up to 1 year. Not recommended. It defaults to 14 days. And like Shabaz said, you set this, and then if a user is on their home network, and not traveling, they won't have to do multi-factor authentication every time they log in. Not really recommended to kind of put a hard and fast amount of time on here, because really what we want to do is utilize conditional access policies to enforce those and put session policies. And we'll talk more about conditional access in detail later on in the section. Don't want to spoil conditional access completely for everybody. But if we do go to conditional access, one of the things we did want to cover is how we can use a conditional access policy to enforce multi-factor authentication. So we can come in here and we can say, and just call it MFA policy, and select specific users. So if we want to select a specific user group and make it our admin accounts, we can set that up and set up certain conditions based on location or platforms or device, and then we can set our access controls up by requiring multi-factor authentication. So based on any of these conditions, if we set up a condition on what it is, maybe we just say all device platforms, configure this and say any device, and the access control is require MFA. This is going to require that user, if they haven't already enrolled in MFA, to enroll in MFA. And I'm not going to just put it as report only for right now, but and like Shabaz said, test these out by a handful of users, like just a specific group or some power users within your environment, and roll it out. Make sure whenever you put a conditional access policy in place too, that you don't lock out yourself as a, if I'm an administrator, so if I turn this on, it might mess me up. So don't worry about that.
Full disclosure, I have done that before, and unfortunately I've done it very recently. Luckily it was not in a live production tenant, but we go back to the first module where we spoke about break glass accounts. Make sure you add your break glass admin account as an exception to all conditional access policies, not just that one, but that one in particular.
Yep, exactly. So if I go back to my users and I go to exclude, and I have my emergency account in here, put that. Oh, I think that didn't catch it. This user, so there's my break glass account, so they are excluded from this. I always put all of my conditional access policies in report only to start, and like I said, we'll talk more about conditional access and testing with what if later on. So a little teaser there. Not going to go into that right now. That's just something to note when we go into conditional access policies, how we can utilize those. The other piece here was talking about lockouts. I'm trying to figure out now where that might be.
I think it's in Azure AD security.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Yes, so if I go to Azure AD into security here, here we have, again, conditional accesses in here. We have identity
multi-factor authentication. It says under MFA. Halfway down.
Yeah, we have multi-factor authentication here. So here's your account lockout piece. So we can set up those failures and set up to have a account locked out. We can set that to reset and to unblock that user after a certain number of minutes. We can, if we find that there's a compromised user, we can go in here and we can say that user is, we can find that user, put that user in. As you can see, we have to put their entire VPN in there for that user, and then say the reason. So if they lost their phone, we can block that user, and they won't receive those requests until we unblock them. Here's the fraud alert, which is really nice, because you yourself as a user can submit that fraud alert if this is turned on as well, and allow them to make that decision and come in here and report a fraud rather than having to call IT as well. But also then alert the IT department that somebody has set a fraud, has reported some level of fraud that they've received, multi-factor authentication. Here's the settings for those OAuth tokens if we're going to use OAuth, or if we're going to use phone calls. Again, as Shabaz, as we whisper, don't use phone calls as your multi-factor authentication method, as well as the providers in here for specific specific sets of subscriptions. And if we're using two-way text messages, and if something has happened where the user has lost their phone or they got a replacement phone and they need to get things reset up, you can do this one-time bypass. Say, or my phone's being fixed. Say you had to take your phone to the Apple store because you dropped it in water or something like that, and they're replacing it for you, and you're going to be you don't have your phone for a few hours. You can you can use this one-time bypass. And then allow them to bypass multi-factor authentication for a certain amount of seconds, and then that'll allow them to be productive while they're getting their phone fixed. I think that covered all. I think I covered off everything that you threw at me there.
I'm sorry, mate. Yeah, you have done. Totally. Thank you very much for that, Dwayne. So yeah, we've covered off now. Episode 1 of module 2, so that's all around MFA settings. We've got a second episode covering some more MFA settings in Azure AD as well, so that'll be coming up next. So thank you very much, Dwayne. Thank you everybody for watching. Just some useful information. We've got some links of our socials in the description. We have a link to Dwayne's book and also a link to the GitHub labs for this SC300 exam, so by all means, follow along with Dwayne's book and the labs. So until next time, thank you everybody and goodbye.
Yeah, thanks everyone.